Welcome to the deep dive. Ready to go deep, like really deep? We're talking algorithms today. The stuff that runs under the hood of, well, pretty much everything online these days.
You know those moments when you think, how did they know I wanted that?
Yeah.
Algorithms.
And to really get into it, we're using Google as like our case study. Google or Alphabet Inc. as they're all official now.
They're practically a verb at this point, right? You Google something. It's wild how they went from this little startup with a kind of cheesy "don't be evil" motto
Yeah, I remember that.
to basically running the show online. So we got to ask, how'd that happen?
Right. Is it just like the natural progression for tech companies? You start small, then bam, you're a giant.
It's a question worth asking. To dig into it, we've got a ton of sources. We're talking academic papers, those company reports nobody reads but are full of juicy details.
Oh, and internal Google stuff, like
Oh.
their search quality rating guidelines.
Oh, yeah, those are gold. They basically tell you how Google defines what's good on the internet, which is, all power.
Okay, so our mission today is to make algorithms less of a mystery. How they work, why they matter, beyond just finding websites.
Because it's not just about finding stuff anymore. Algorithms are shaping how we see the world.
Exactly. And maybe even what we think about the world. All right, let's get started. Most people remember Google's whole "don't be evil" thing, right? Seemed pretty idealistic back then.
Yeah, there was this image of them as the good guys, user-focused, not like those other big corporations, but then they became one of the biggest. So does that change things? Does "don't be evil" just not work when you're that big?
It makes you wonder, like, does something shift fundamentally when a company goes from a garage to, well, Google? To answer that, we need to bring in a philosopher, Herbert Marcuse. He had this idea of technological rationality.
Okay, stay with me here. Marcuse said tech isn't neutral. It reflects the values of whoever built it, whoever controls it. And in a capital system, what's the big goal?
Profit, right?
Bingo. So how does that goal, that drive for profit, how does it shape the tech we use every day?
Good question. So we all know Google's algorithm is crazy good at giving us search results. But efficient for WHO is the real question.
There it is. That's the core of it. To understand Google's power, we got to break it down. Think of it like layers of control.
Layers. Okay. I'm intrigued.
Layer one, we can call it organizational rationality. Basically, Google's internal culture. They get amazing people to work there, but all those brilliant minds end up focused on the same stuff: profit, growth, staying on top.
And you can see it in how their workforces change, right? Like way back, it was lots of sales and marketing people. Now it's all about research and development.
Right. The algorithm itself is the priority. But there's this other thing, something called immaterial labor. Every search you do, every link you click, even just looking at ads, that's feeding Google's machine.
So we're not just users. We're part of how the algorithm gets so good.
Yeah,
That's kind of creepy when you think about it.
totally. Okay, layer two. Informational rationality, we could call it. Google's making two really valuable things. One, your attention, which they package up and sell to advertisers.
The whole audience commodity thing, it's us. We're the product.
Yep. And the other thing Google's making, even more powerful maybe, is the algorithm itself. Protected by all this intellectual property stuff, it makes them the gatekeeper of what we see online.
And that creates a loop, right? More users means more data for the algorithm, which makes it even better, which makes it almost impossible for anyone else to compete.
Exactly. Now this is where it gets heady. Layer three, the algorithmic machinery itself. And to get this, we got to talk about re-exification. Ever heard of that?
Yeah, but I'll be honest, always kind of went over my head.
It's a big concept, but basically reification is how complex stuff gets hidden. We just accept things as how they are. Like we trust the top Google results, right? We assume they're the best, most relevant.
Makes sense, but you're saying it's not that simple.
Right. That order, that ranking, it's all choices Google made. We think it's objective, the truth, but it's really their values and goals reflected back at us.
Whoa. So even though the algorithm is super complex, it's still a human creation with human biases built in.
Exactly. And those choices matter a lot. Take those your money or your life pages. Google calls them YMYL.
Finance, health, shopping, important stuff.
Yep. And also very profitable stuff. Those websites have the big ad budgets Google wants.
So they're not just prioritizing these pages because they're important, but because they make money.
Makes you think, right? Like, is quality for Google the same as what's truly best for us?
That raises a lot of questions about bias. If Google's system favors certain types of content, Doesn't that change what we learn, what we believe?
Absolutely. It's not always intentional manipulation. Google's not trying to trick us. But the way they built the system creates bias, and that bias affects how we see the world.
That's scary, honestly. So we've talked about what Google prioritizes. What about the stuff that gets left OUT?
That's a big part of it, too. All the information that doesn't fit neatly into Google's categories. Independent news, different viewpoints, stuff that challenges the status quo. That's what gets drowned out.
And that's where it feels hopeless, right? This giant system controlling what we see, and we can't do anything about it.
It's tempting to feel that way, but there are things we can do, individually and together, to push back.
Okay, I'm listening. Give me some hope here.
We'll get into the specifics in a bit, but first, we got to understand, this isn't just about changing a few settings or using a different search engine. This is about a bigger question.
Lay it on me.
What kind of world do we want to live in? One where algorithms are in charge, or one where we have the tools and knowledge to make technology work for us?
That's deep. Maybe we need to take a break and think about that one for a minute. All right, so where were we? Algorithms, Google, kind of feeling like we're stuck in a system we can't control.
Yeah, it can be overwhelming. But remember, knowledge is power, right? The more we understand these systems, the better we can navigate them, challenge them, maybe even change them.
Right. It's easy to forget that technology isn't some force of nature. People made this stuff. People can change it.
Exactly. And that brings us to this idea of the great refusal. It's from that philosopher Herbert Marcuse. He said we don't have to just accept the reality we're given. We can say no. Refuse to play along with systems that don't serve us.
The great refusal. I like that. It sounds kind of rebellious. But how do we actually do that? What can one person or even a group of people really do against, like, Gujueli?
Well, for one thing, there's policy, laws, regulations. We're seeing it in the European Union. They've been taking on Google with antitrust stuff, trying to break up their power, make them more transparent.
So collective action, government stepping in. What else?
There's also the power of, like, our everyday choices, being mindful of our data.
Yeah.
What we share, what websites we visit, the apps we use. Could you try a different search engine? Are there ways to limit what data you're feeding to the algorithm?
Being more aware of our digital footprint. Making conscious choices.
Exactly. And we can choose to support independent media, places that aren't beholden to the same algorithm pressures as the big guys. Every click, every subscription, every dollar you give them, that's a vote for a more diverse media landscape.
Okay, so individual action, collective action, through policy, supporting alternative sources. You said something earlier I wanted to go back to, though. Praxis. What did you mean by that?
Praxis is like the next level. It's not just individual actions or even policy. It's combining awareness with action, deeply understanding the forces at play and then using that understanding to make real change.
Not just knowing, but doing. I like it.
Right. And that doing can look like a lot of things. Talking to people about this stuff, sharing articles, raising awareness, supporting organizations fighting for a better internet, pushing for stronger regulations, demanding transparency from the tech giants.
I love that. It's like, yeah, knowledge is power, but then you got to do something with that power. Because at the end of the day, algorithms are just tools. The question is, who controls them and for what purpose?
You got it. That's why praxis is so crucial. It's not just about resisting one algorithm or one platform. It's about building a future where technology works for humans, not the other way around.
So how do we get there? Because it feels so big, so complex.
It is complex, but not impossible. Think about those Google search quality rating guidelines. They show why transparency is so important. We need to see behind the curtain, understand how decisions are being made about what's relevant, what's quality.
Right, right. So those guidelines, they basically tell us how Google categorizes information, how they decide what we see, what gets buried.
Exactly. And those decisions have huge implications. They shape the stories we see, the information we have access to, even how we think about certain issues.
Okay, let's dig into these guidelines then. What stands out? What should we know?
One thing that jumps out is how much they focus on what they call EAT.
EAT, what's that?
Expertise, authoritativeness, and trustworthiness. It's how Google tries to judge if a website or a piece of content is credible.
Okay, so they're trying to make sure we get accurate, reliable stuff. That's good.
Right, on the surface, yeah. But it gets tricky. How do you define those things? Expertise, authority, trust. Who gets to decide what those words mean?
You're right. What seems objective is actually pretty subjective. It depends on someone's opinion of what makes a source credible.
Exactly. And this is where those biases we talked about come in.
So how does it actually work? Give me an example.
Imagine you're researching something controversial. Lots of different opinions on it. If Google's algorithm using these EAT guidelines prioritizes certain sources, they're shaping what you see, even if those sources aren't the most accurate or complete picture.
I get it. The algorithm's like a filter, showing us some things, hiding others.
Exactly. And that's why we got to be careful. Don't just accept what you see, question the sources, look for different perspectives. Remember, even the smartest algorithm is still made by humans, with human biases.
This is a lot to take in. But there's a common thread here. We need to be aware of how algorithms work. Indeed, we need to be more active, demand transparency, hold these companies accountable.
You got it. And that loops back to praxis. It's not enough to just understand we got to do something with that knowledge.
So where do we go from here? What can our listeners actually do?
That's the question, isn't it? And that's what we should spend some time on. Figuring out some strategies for this algorithm-driven world. How to take back control, be informed, be engaged.
Okay, back to those Google search quality rating guidelines.
Yeah.
And specifically, how that EAT thing, expertise, authoritativeness, trustworthiness, can actually make the information we see online more biased.
It all comes down to who gets to decide what those words mean,
Yeah.
right? Those categories seem objective, but they're not. And the way Google uses them, well, it changes everything. Most people have no idea this is even happening.
So how do we start to see past that filter? How do we become, smarter about what we're seeing online?
It sounds simple, but just pay attention to the source. Don't just click the first link Google gives you. Stop for a second, think about who's behind the website, what they're trying to do. Might there be other points of view out there?
So basically, don't be so trusting.
Yeah. A healthy dose of skepticism is good, and that goes for Google itself, too. They're a business. Their goal is to make money. That doesn't make them evil, but it does mean we got to be aware of how that shapes what they show us.
Be skeptical of the sources, be skeptical of Google. What else?
Seek out different perspectives. Don't just stay on that first page of results. Dig deeper, find different sources, different opinions, different ways of looking at the same issue.
Like diversify our information diet.
Exactly. Don't let the algorithm keep you in an echo chamber. And this might mean getting a little uncomfortable, checking out websites you've never heard of, reading stuff you don't agree with.
I get that. That can be tough.
Yeah.
But I guess it's how you get a more complete picture, right?
You got it. There's rarely one right answer, especially with complicated stuff. There are a lot of valid viewpoints out there, and we got to do the work of weighing them, figuring out what WE think.
Critical thinking. More important than ever these days, huh?
Absolutely. We can't just let Google think for our. We got to be part of the process. Gathering information, evaluating it, making our own decisions about what it all means.
So we've talked about being skeptical, getting different perspectives, using our brains. What about supporting those alternative platforms, the organizations trying to do things differently?
That's huge. Remember those independent media outlets? They're so important. They're out there offering different ways of seeing things, challenging the stories that the algorithms want us to believe.
So supporting them, like with subscriptions or donations, even just sharing their stuff, that's like putting our money where our mouth is.
Exactly. And there are groups out there fighting for a better internet, a fairer one. Supporting them, volunteering, donating, telling people about them. That's how we make a difference.
It's kind of inspiring when you think about it. We do have power to change things. It's not all just algorithms running the show.
It's easy to feel powerless, but we're not. Remember, technology is a tool. And like any tool, it can be used for good or bad. It's our choice. How we use it, how we shape it, what kind of future we build with it.
That's a great point to end on. We've covered a lot today, huh? Algorithms, Google, all this hidden stuff shaping our online lives.
We have, but the big takeaway is this. It's not hopeless. You, dear listener, you have choices. You can question, you can challenge, you can demand better. The internet's not fixed, it's changing all the time, and you're part of that change.
So stay curious, stay critical, and stay engaged. The more we understand this stuff, the better equipped we are to make the internet a place that works for us, not the other way around.
Couldn't have said it better myself. It's not about being passive, it's about being active participants, shaping the technology that's shaping us.
That's it for our deep dive into algorithms and the forces at play online. Until next time, keep learning, keep exploring, and keep diving deep.